You think you're behind. That's the first lie. You scroll and see people announcing engagements, promotions, breakthroughs, platforms, launches, testimonies. Everyone seems to be moving. Everyone seems to be advancing. And somehow, you feel suspended, like your life has been placed on pause while everyone else presses fast forward. You prayed. You prepared. You showed up. You stayed faithful. And yet, nothing moved. Doors didn't open. The call didn't come. The opportunity didn't appear. The answer didn't arrive. So now you're asking the question you don't say out loud. Did God forget me? Because waiting doesn't just test your patience. It tests your identity. There's something uniquely painful about delay. Failure at least gives you clarity. Rejection at least gives you direction. But waiting? Waiting gives you silence. And silence is loud. It whispers things like, maybe you're not ready. Maybe you're not chosen. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe it's not going to happen. Waiting makes you question your calling. It makes you question your timing. It makes you question whether you imagined the promise in the first place. And the hardest part? You can't explain it to anyone. From the outside, your life looks stable. You're not in crisis. You're not in disaster. You're just stuck in between. Not where you were. Not where you're going. Just suspended. But what if I told you something that might interrupt the narrative you've been building in your head? What if the delay is deliberate? What if you are not being ignored, but positioned? What if God is not withholding from you, but protecting you? We assume that speed equals favor. We assume that quick success equals blessing. We assume that instant doors mean divine approval. But what if the most dangerous thing that could happen to you right now is acceleration? Because promotion without preparation is exposure. Elevation without formation is collapse. And sometimes the reason nothing is moving is because something deeper is being built. You don't feel it. You don't see it. But something is happening beneath the surface. Think about foundations. No one celebrates foundations. No one posts pictures of concrete being poured underground. No one applauds steel being embedded where it can't be seen. But the taller the building, the deeper the foundation must go. And here's the part most people don't understand. The deeper the foundation, the longer the delay. If what's coming requires strength you don't yet have, the wait isn't punishment. It's protection. You think you're being stalled. He thinks you're being strengthened. You think you're being overlooked. He thinks you're being developed. And this is the tension of faith. Believing that silence does not equal absence. Because the waiting season is the season where your faith is refined, not by miracles, but by endurance. When nothing changes externally, everything internal is revealed. Your motives, your patience, your resilience, your humility. Waiting exposes what success hides. It forces you to confront the question. If it never happens, will I still trust? That's uncomfortable. Because most of us are okay with faith, as long as it moves fast. But slow faith? Silent faith? Uncelebrated faith? That's different. That's where maturity is born. And here's something that might challenge you. What if you're not waiting on God? What if God is waiting on you? Waiting on your character to match your calling. Waiting on your capacity to match your vision. Waiting on your discipline to match your dream. We want the platform. He wants the person. We want visibility. He wants stability. And sometimes the greatest evidence of divine intention is divine delay. Because if he wanted you there already, you'd be there. The fact that you're not there yet is not proof of rejection. It might be proof of precision. There is a timing to everything. Not random timing. Not chaotic timing. Intentional timing. And if you move before you're formed, what was meant to bless you can break you. So before you label this season as stagnation, consider the possibility that it's strategy. Before you interpret silence as abandonment, consider that it may be construction. Because God does his deepest work in hidden seasons. And maybe, just maybe, this waiting is not a detour. It's design. And by the end of this message, you might realize something that will change how you see this entire season of your life. You are not delayed. You are being prepared. Waiting is not neutral. It doesn't sit quietly in the background of your life. It presses against you. It stretches you. It exposes parts of you that success never touches. There is a specific kind of ache that only waiting produces. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's not catastrophic. It's slow. It's the ache of watching time pass while your situation stays the same. It's waking up and realizing that another month has gone by. Another year. Another season. And what you hoped would shift hasn't. You thought by now you would be further. Further in your career. Further in your calling. Further in your relationships. Further in your spiritual growth. But instead, you're still in the middle. Still in process. Still waiting for something you believed would already be here. And what makes waiting so difficult is that it doesn't give you closure. Failure closes a chapter. Rejection shuts a door. But waiting keeps the door slightly open. Just enough to keep you hoping. Just enough to keep you wondering. Just enough to keep you asking, is it about to happen? That tension, hope mixed with uncertainty, is exhausting. You try to stay positive. You tell yourself, God's timing is perfect. You quote the verses. You remind yourself to trust. You pray again. You fast again. You declare again. But inside, there's a whisper you fight. Why not yet? Waiting makes you confront comparison in a way nothing else does. You don't want to compare. But you do. You see someone with less preparation step into opportunity faster. You see someone with less discipline receive recognition sooner. You see someone with less depth gain visibility quicker. And you wonder if you did something wrong. Comparison is poison in a waiting season. Because it makes you measure your journey by someone else's clock. And here's the problem. You only see their highlight. You don't see their foundation. You don't see their weaknesses. You don't see what they'll struggle to sustain later. But in the waiting, your insecurity becomes louder. Waiting strips away distraction. When you're busy progressing, you don't overthink. When things are moving, you don't question as much. But when nothing shifts externally, your mind turns inward. You start asking, am I really called? Am I really gifted? Did I mishear God? Am I just average? Did I overestimate myself? Waiting has a way of making even confident people doubt their identity. And this is where many people break. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack faith, but because they misinterpret the silence. We assume that visible progress equals divine approval. So when there is no visible progress, we assume something is wrong. But waiting is not always correction. Sometimes it's cultivation. Still, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like being overlooked. There's a loneliness in waiting that is hard to describe. You can't fully talk about it because nothing is technically wrong. You're not in crisis. You're just not moving. And the world doesn't celebrate stability. It celebrates acceleration. It celebrates breakthroughs. It celebrates overnight success. It celebrates arrival. No one posts about enduring. No one applauds consistency. No one goes viral for staying faithful in obscurity. But that's where you are. And the longer you stay there, the more your patience is tested. There are days you feel strong. Days where you genuinely trust. Days where you feel steady and anchored. And then there are nights. Nights where doubt creeps in quietly. Where you replay conversations. Where you rethink decisions. Where you question timing. Where you wonder if you should have forced something instead of waiting. Waiting tempts you to manipulate outcomes. To push doors open. To network harder, to compromise standards, to lower convictions, to accept less than what you once believed for. Because something feels better than nothing, even if it's wrong, even if it's premature. Waiting exposes your tolerance for discomfort. Can you sit in uncertainty without self-sabotaging? Can you endure silence without manufacturing noise? Can you trust without constant reassurance? Most people don't struggle with faith when things are happening. They struggle with faith when nothing is happening. And yet, waiting is where your internal world is shaped. It reveals your motives. Were you pursuing the promise or the applause? Were you chasing purpose or recognition? Were you faithful or were you performing? Waiting strips performance. Because when no one is watching and nothing is advancing, the only thing left is sincerity. And that's uncomfortable. Because sometimes we discover that we tied our identity to outcomes. I'll feel valuable when it happens. I'll feel secure when I arrive. I'll feel confident when I'm chosen. Waiting dismantles that illusion. It forces you to confront who you are without the title, without the platform, without the breakthrough. And that confrontation feels like loss, even if nothing tangible has been taken from you. There's also the fear factor. Time feels like it's moving. Opportunities feel finite. Age feels real. And you start thinking in deadlines. If it doesn't happen by this point, if I'm not there by then, deadlines create pressure. Pressure creates anxiety. Anxiety tempts control. Control disrupts trust. And suddenly, waiting becomes a battlefield in your mind. You begin negotiating with God. Just give me a sign. Just give me clarity. Just tell me if it's coming. Because uncertainty is harder than rejection. Rejection at least lets you grieve and move on. Waiting keeps you suspended in hope. And hope, when stretched too long, can feel fragile. But here's the truth is, most people don't fail in their calling. They abandon it in the waiting. They pivot out of frustration. They compromise out of fatigue. They settle out of fear. Not because they weren't capable, but because the pain of delay felt unbearable. But what if the waiting is not designed to weaken you? What if it's designed to reveal you? To show you where your trust truly sits? To detach you from timelines you created? To separate ambition from assignment? Waiting is uncomfortable because it removes illusion. It reveals whether your faith depends on movement or on conviction. And maybe that's why it hurts so much. Because waiting is not passive. It's active transformation under the surface. You don't see the growth, but you are growing. You don't see the alignment, but alignment is happening. You don't see the strengthening, but your endurance is increasing. The pain is real. The questions are real. The frustration is real. But so is the formation. And before we even talk about what God is doing in this season, you need to understand something clearly. You are not the first to feel this tension. You are not abnormal. You are not forgotten. Delay has always been part of divine patterns. And when you see that pattern clearly, waiting will stop feeling random and start feeling intentional. If waiting were a mistake, it would not be repeated. But throughout Scripture, delay is not the exception. It is the pattern. And that changes everything. Because once you realize that the greatest callings in history were preceded by extended seasons of silence, obscurity, and delay, your situation stops feeling personal. It starts feeling prophetic. Look at Joseph. He was given a dream early. Not a small dream. Not a vague impression. A clear vision of leadership, authority, influence. He saw himself elevated long before he ever touched a throne. And then, he was betrayed, sold, falsely accused, imprisoned. Years passed. Not days. Not weeks. Years. Imagine carrying a divine dream while sitting in a prison cell. Imagine knowing what was promised while living in the opposite reality. That's delay. Joseph had the calling long before he had the platform. And here's the critical detail. Nothing about the prison looked connected to the palace. But the prison developed the discipline that the palace would require. Delay was not denial. It was development. Now look at David. Anointed as king while still a shepherd. Oil poured over his head. A prophetic declaration spoken. A public confirmation of destiny. And then what happened? He went back to the field. Back to obscurity. Back to tending sheep. Back to being overlooked. Even after defeating Goliath, even after public victory, he did not immediately ascend to the throne. Instead, he spent years running, hiding, surviving. The promise came early. The promotion came later. In between was formation. David's delay wasn't accidental. It was essential, because the man who would lead a nation had to first be shaped in private battles no one applauded. Then there's Abraham, given a promise of descendants as numerous as the stars. But time passed. Years passed. His body aged. His wife aged. Biology said no. Logic said impossible. The promise stood in tension with reality. That's the cruelty of waiting, when circumstances contradict what you believe. And yet the delay refined trust. It stripped Abraham of self-reliance. It exposed doubt. It forced him to confront whether his faith depended on visible evidence or divine word. Delay purified the promise. Consider Moses, raised in a palace, educated, positioned, potential leader from the beginning. But after one impulsive act, he fled into the wilderness. 40 years. Not 4. Not 14. 40. 40 years of obscurity. 40 years of tending sheep in isolation. Imagine being trained for leadership and then spending decades in the desert. It looks like a detour. But the desert stripped pride. It replaced impulsiveness with humility. It slowed him down enough to hear God clearly. The wilderness wasn't wasted time. It was preparation. Notice the pattern. Calling comes first. Delay comes second. Elevation comes last. We think the sequence should be calling, immediate fulfillment. But the biblical sequence is calling, hidden formation, delay, testing, refinement, fulfillment. The middle is longer than we expect. And that middle is where most people misinterpret their story. Because culturally, we are conditioned to believe that speed equals blessing. But in Scripture, depth precedes influence. Weight precedes visibility. Capacity precedes responsibility. Even when you look at Jesus, 30 years of relative obscurity before 3 years of public ministry. 30 years. If anyone could have accelerated the timeline, it would have been him. But even there, delay had purpose. The pattern is consistent. When the assignment is significant, the preparation is extended. When the influence is large, the hidden season is deep. Delay is proportional to calling. That's uncomfortable, because it suggests that your waiting may actually be evidence of scale. The greater the weight you're meant to carry, the stronger you must become. And strength is not built in spotlight moments. It's built in hidden endurance. Think about it. If Joseph had stepped into leadership immediately after the dream, without prison shaping his resilience, would he have had the integrity to sustain power? If David had become king immediately after anointing, without years of humility and survival, would he have had the maturity to lead wisely? If Moses had confronted Pharaoh immediately after palace training, without desert refinement, would he have had the patience to shepherd a stubborn nation? Delay prevented destruction. That's the part we miss. We assume delay is obstruction, but often, delay is insulation. Protection from premature exposure. Protection from untested character. Protection from opportunities you are not yet internally stable enough to sustain. There is something dangerous about early elevation. It amplifies whatever is inside you. If insecurity is inside you, elevation magnifies it. If pride is inside you, elevation magnifies it. If impatience is inside you, elevation magnifies it. Delay gives you time to confront what elevation would expose. And that confrontation is mercy. The biblical pattern is clear. The promise often arrives before the preparation feels complete. The vision often arrives before the vessel is ready. And the delay is the bridge between those two realities. It is not wasted time. It is intentional shaping. There's another layer to this pattern. Delay creates dependence. When everything moves quickly, we rely on momentum. When everything moves slowly, we rely on trust. Momentum makes you feel powerful. Trust makes you surrender. And surrender is what aligns you with divine timing. Every major biblical figure faced a gap between promise and fulfillment. That gap is where identity was forged. Because if your identity is built solely on outcomes, delay will destroy you. But if your identity is built on relationship, delay will deepen you. The waiting seasons were not blank spaces in their story. They were the chapters that made the final chapter sustainable. Imagine reading only the end of their stories. Joseph in power, David on the throne, Abraham with Isaac, Moses leading the Exodus. It looks triumphant. But without the delay, without the hidden years, without the refining tension, the ending would collapse under its own weight. And this is where perspective shifts. You are not experiencing something abnormal. You are walking a pattern that has existed long before you, a pattern that suggests significance requires strengthening. The danger is not in waiting. The danger is in misinterpreting waiting. If you label delay as rejection, you'll retreat. If you label delay as abandonment, you'll harden. If you label delay as failure, you'll settle. But if you recognize delay as formation, you endure differently. You don't panic as quickly. You don't compare as deeply. You don't force doors prematurely. Because you understand something that changes everything. God does not rush what he intends to sustain. The biblical pattern proves that delay is not a flaw in the process. It is part of the process. And once you see that pattern clearly, you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is being built in me? And that question, that shift, is where maturity begins. Because if delay has always preceded elevation, then maybe your waiting is not an accident. Maybe it is alignment. If waiting were empty, it would be unbearable. But waiting is never empty. It only feels empty because the work happening is internal. And internal work is invisible. You don't see roots growing beneath the soil. You don't hear steel being reinforced inside concrete. You don't watch character being formed in real time. But that doesn't mean nothing is happening. When God makes you wait, he is not passive. He is precise. There are at least 4 major things happening in your waiting season, whether you feel them or not. And understanding them will change how you endure. 1. He is building your character. Character is what sustains what charisma attracts. Most people want opportunity. Few people are ready for responsibility. Opportunity gets you seen. Character keeps you standing. Waiting exposes your internal weaknesses before public exposure does. Think about what waiting forces you to confront. Impatience, entitlement, comparison, control, fear. When you are delayed, you discover what irritates you. You discover what tempts you. You discover what you're willing to compromise for speed. That discovery is uncomfortable, but it is necessary, because elevation amplifies everything inside you. If insecurity lives in you now, visibility will magnify it later. If pride lives in you now, influence will inflate it later. If instability lives in you now, pressure will shatter you later. Waiting gives you time to confront these things quietly, without an audience, without pressure, without stakes that are too high. God would rather deal with your character in obscurity than watch you collapse publicly. That's mercy. You think you're ready because you see your potential. He sees your patterns. You see your talent. He sees your tendencies. You see the dream. He sees the weaknesses that would sabotage it. Character building is slow because it is deep. You don't rush integrity. You don't microwave humility. You don't accelerate emotional maturity. Those are forged over time, especially in frustration. Waiting teaches you to remain faithful when no one is applauding. That's integrity. Waiting teaches you to serve without recognition. That's humility. Waiting teaches you to be disciplined without visible reward. That's maturity. And those 3 things, integrity, humility, maturity, are what sustain influence. Without them, promotion becomes pressure, and pressure reveals cracks. If you were elevated now, would you handle criticism well? If you were promoted now, would you handle opposition with composure? If you were recognized now, would you stay grounded? Waiting strengthens those muscles, and muscles only grow under resistance. 2. He is increasing your capacity. Capacity is different from desire. You may desire something deeply, but can you carry it? Capacity is about emotional strength, spiritual depth, mental resilience, and practical discipline. The higher you go, the heavier it gets. Influence is heavy. Responsibility is heavy. Leadership is heavy. Impact is heavy. We romanticize elevation. We don't calculate the weight of it. When doors open, expectations increase. When visibility grows, criticism multiplies. When influence expands, think about how many people collapse not because of lack of opportunity, but because of unresolved internal issues. Unhealed insecurity, uncontrolled impulses, unaddressed pride. Waiting gives space for purification. And purification feels like loss at first, because letting go hurts. But losing what cannot sustain your future is protection, not punishment. If something had to be removed before you were elevated, it's because carrying it upward would have cost you more. And delay gives time for that separation to happen without catastrophic fallout. 4. He is aligning timing you cannot see. Timing is the most underestimated element of purpose. You think it's about readiness. Sometimes it's about alignment. There are moving pieces you do not control. Other people's readiness. Other people's decisions. Openings that must exist. Conditions that must align. If you were elevated too early, you might enter a space before it is stable. If you move too soon, you might attach yourself to something that collapses. Divine timing considers factors beyond your awareness. You see your desire. God sees the ecosystem. You see your ambition. God sees the network of consequences. Waiting aligns circumstances in ways you cannot orchestrate. And that alignment often requires silence. Because if you saw every delay as a strategic move, you wouldn't panic. But because you don't see it, you assume randomness. It's not random. Precision rarely feels dramatic. It feels slow. But slow alignment creates sustainable outcomes. There is also protection in timing. Sometimes the opportunity you want right now would expose you to pressure you are not yet emotionally fortified to handle. Timing shields you from battles you are not equipped for yet. It is not about withholding. It is about sequencing. Sequence matters. If events happen out of order, stability collapses. Waiting preserves order. And order preserves longevity. The hidden transformation. When you step back and look at these 4 areas, character, capacity, purification, alignment, you begin to realize something profound. Waiting is not a gap in your story. It is the workshop of your story. It is where invisible adjustments are made, where weaknesses are strengthened, where motives are purified, where foundations are reinforced. The tragedy would not be waiting. The tragedy would be elevation without preparation. Because elevation without preparation creates exposure. And exposure without strength creates collapse. God is not interested in short-term excitement. He is invested in long-term stability. He is less concerned with how quickly you rise, and more concerned with how firmly you stand once you're there. Waiting feels slow because growth beneath the surface is slow. Roots take time. Steel reinforcement takes time. Emotional resilience takes time. Spiritual depth takes time. You don't see the transformation daily. But if you compare who you are now to who you were before this season began, you're stronger. You're less reactive. You're more discerning. You're more grounded. You've learned things you never would have learned in accelerated success. That's not stagnation. That's strengthening. And when the door finally opens, because it will, you will not enter it as the same person who first desired it. You will enter it heavier in maturity, steadier in identity, clearer in conviction, more resilient under pressure. That's the purpose of the wait. Not to delay your destiny, but to develop your durability. Because durability is what sustains destiny. And when you understand that, waiting stops feeling like abandonment. It starts feeling like construction. You've been calling this season delay, but maybe it's design. You've been calling it silence, but maybe it's strategy. You've been asking, why is nothing happening? But the better question might be, what is being built that I cannot see? The problem with waiting is not that it slows you down. The problem is how you interpret it. If you see waiting as rejection, you shrink. If you see waiting as punishment, you harden. If you see waiting as failure, you settle. But if you see waiting as preparation, you endure differently. You stop panicking every time nothing moves. You stop comparing every time someone else advances. You stop forcing doors every time impatience rises. Because you understand something most people never learn. Delay is not denial. It is development. And development is rarely comfortable. Think about who you were before this season. You were more reactive, more anxious, more driven by urgency, more dependent on visible progress. Now, you've learned to sit in uncertainty without collapsing. You've learned to keep showing up without applause. You've learned to pray without immediate feedback. You've learned to trust without constant reassurance. That is growth. Not flashy growth, not public growth, but deep growth. And deep growth is the kind that sustains. You thought this season was holding you back, but it's actually holding you steady. Because rushing into something before you're anchored would have shaken you. You think you're behind. But behind according to who? According to culture? According to peers? According to social media timelines? Heaven does not operate on comparison. It operates on completion. And completion takes time. You don't bake foundations. You lay them, layer by layer. You don't rush strength. You build it, repetition by repetition. And here's what changes everything. What if the very thing you're frustrated about today is the reason you won't break tomorrow? What if this endurance is the reason you'll stand when others fall? What if this slow season is the reason your future won't collapse under pressure? Reframing the weight means recognizing that speed is not always success. Some people rise fast and burn out faster. Some doors open quickly and close just as quickly. Some opportunities look impressive but lack depth. Longevity requires layers, and layers take time. You are not being stalled. You are being stabilized. You are not being overlooked. You are being overhauled. You are not being ignored. You are being reinforced. The weight is not empty space. It is sacred space. It is the quiet workshop where your identity is refined, where your motives are clarified, where your confidence stops depending on outcomes, where your trust grows roots. And when you begin to see it that way, something shifts inside you. You stop asking, when will it happen? And start asking, who am I becoming? Because who you become is more important than what you receive. If you receive the blessing without becoming the person who can steward it, the blessing becomes a burden. But if you become the person first, when the blessing arrives, it feels natural, stable, aligned. There's also this truth you need to hear clearly. God is not in a hurry. And if he's not in a hurry, you don't have to be either. We rush because we fear missing out. We rush because we fear being left behind. We rush because we fear time running out. But divine timing is not threatened by human clocks. Nothing assigned to you can be stolen by delay. Nothing meant for you can expire because of patience. If it is truly yours, preparation will not disqualify you. It will position you. The weight is not subtracting from your future. It is adding weight to it. It is adding stability. It is adding wisdom. It is adding resilience. And resilience is what allows elevation to last. You don't want a moment. You want impact. You don't want hype. You want sustainability. You don't want fast recognition. You want lasting influence. And lasting influence is never built quickly. So instead of fighting the season, lean into it. Instead of resisting the stillness, grow within it. Instead of measuring your life by visible progress, measure it by internal strength. Because when the moment comes, and it will come, you will not step into it fragile. You will step into it formed. You will not step into it desperate. You will step into it grounded. You will not step into it trying to prove yourself. You will step into it prepared. And when you finally look back, you will understand why it couldn't happen sooner. You will see the cracks that needed mending, the habits that needed breaking, the insecurities that needed healing, the discipline that needed strengthening. You will see how premature elevation would have exposed weaknesses that this waiting quietly repaired. And gratitude will replace frustration. Clarity will replace confusion. Confidence will replace doubt. So don't rush this. Don't sabotage this. Don't compare your timeline to someone else's highlight reel. What is being built in you right now is invisible, but invaluable. And invisible work often produces the strongest outcomes. You are not behind. You are in process. You are not forgotten. You are being formed. You are not delayed. You are being developed. And when it happens, not if, but when, it will not feel random. It will feel ready. And so will you.